Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumos, Perek Aleph Halacha Hey. We're learning today Daf Yud Dalid. We left off on Daf Yud Dalid, Amid Aleph, 5 lines from the top of the Amid, Tamon Taninon. So let's quickly review where we're at. First of all, we're going to start today quoting a Mishnah from Masechtas Eduyos that will also speak, as it says clearly, about designating olives for oil. From now on, until we finish the sugya, olives for oil, we're gonna say daf tes, and oil for olives is daf yud beis. So the Mishnah in Oidios will speak about a few things, but including about the designating olives for oil. And as we just quoted in the Braisa at the end of yesterday's shir, that the Rabbi Meir holds that post facto trumasei truma, unlike the girsa that we had, unlike the Mishnah that we had on Daf Tes, and Rabbi Yossi is going to say that even according to Beis Hillel, truma say truma. That last statement does not work. That's what we also learned yesterday. Why not? Because we had a braisa on Daf Yud Aleph that quoted Rabbi Yossi saying explicitly that in the case of olives for oil, machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but certainly the truma is not truma. Really, even according to Beis Shammai, the truma of olives for the oil is not truma. Elamad, the olives for the olives is truma. So therefore, again, it must be that even in the Iduyos, when we quote Rabbi Yossi's quote that truma say truma is not for the case of olives for oil. It must be the case of Daf Yud Beis, oil for olives. And here, indeed, we see that in our Mishnah, when you separate oil for olives, if you lose the oil, the Mishnah says, then when you make the olives into oil, yachzer v'yitroim. That's our Mishnah. And again, we'll see that Rabbi Yossi does not hold of that. Rabbi Yossi will hold that post facto, oil for olives, truma se truma. And like any other truma, by the way, even when you lose it, you don't have to separate truma again. In other words, we'll see again, as we concluded on top of Daf Yud Dalid, that Rabbi Yossi does not subscribe to Geder Mechatos, even though Rabbi Yossi does subscribe to Gezel Shevet. Okay, now regarding this din of our Mishnah, Daf Yud Beis, that oil for olives, like we already mentioned, even though the Mishnah doesn't say these words, that if you lose the oil, then yachzor v'yitroim. We're going to learn a couple of more nuances about that, including something that we learned in the beginning of yesterday's shir in the Marafulda, that even though yachzor v'yitroim, it's aside of what the Mishnah said, two halachic differences between biblical truma and rabbinic truma. But let me just say the words that we will learn in the Gemara today, that shniya loy say achel achi yoitzi aleha trumais umaisres mimakam acher, as we'll explain it a little bit more elaborately when we learn the Gemara inside. We're going to move on to the next part of the Mishnah. The next part of the Mishnah was that if you separate wine for grapes that are being designated to turn into raisins, the Mishnah says that's okay, because wine is a finished product, and the grapes that are designated to be turned into raisins, we also consider already the grapes into a finished product. We already spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, that will be problematic. Actually, we're going to quote a Mishnah from Masechtas Maasros that appears to contradict our rule, and the Gemara is going to reconcile. And finally, we'll have a source for the third din in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Beis. The third din is that lechatchila, one should not separate truma mi davar sheloi nigmar hamalachtoi al davar sheloi nigmar hamalachtoi. Why not? What's the source for that? Don't forget, here it's not oil for olives or olives for oil. Here, let's say you have olives, right? All of it is going to be turned into oil. Okay, you're not chayiv to separate trumas from maasros until when you have the oil. I get it. But that you should lechatchila not do it, why is that? Again, with the source we'll have at the end of today's daf. Okay, daf Yud Dalid, daf 5 lines from the top of the Amud on Amud Aleph. The whole Mesechtes Eduyos, just to quickly give a quick intro to that. If you remember the story that we have in Brachos, Daf Chav Zayin, we had the same story, same but different in the Yerushalmi, of what happened on the day of and what led up to Rabbi Eliezer ben Azarias being appointed to be the head of the Sanhedrin. Part of that story, right? We say every time when we say the Haggadah. So when on that day, he wanted to compile many halachos and to make sure that they should not be forgotten. So he got people to testify about certain things that they heard. And it's like a compilation. Masechtas Ideas is not one topic. There are many, many, many topics. So including in one of the many Mishnayos that we have in the Duyos, says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, Shisha Dvarim Mikule Beishamai Mechumre Beisilal, that the following 6 matters are areas in which Beishamai is lenient and Beisilal is machmer. And actually, just a quick pause on that. We're learning this week the Maimer Eretz Harim Uvekoyis from the Alter Rebbe. This is Parshas Ekev. So we were learning about the world of Toyo and the world of Tikkun. And ultimately, the difference between them is that in the world of Toyo, the bittul came because of the oir, and in the world of Tikkun, in the Atzilus that we talk about of Tikkun, the bittul, the ma, came from the Kalim. And that's why there is a hiskalulus between the midos that are long-lasting. Part of that hiskalulus would mean, like in our case over here, that even though Beishamai is gevura, Beisilal is chesed, in Beishamai there's also chesed. In Beisilal there's gevura, which expressed itself that at times Beishamai was the lenient one, Beisilal was the chomer one, and that allows that connection between Beishamai and Beisilal to happen, not because of this great light that is imposed upon them, like Oisa Shalom b'Mroimov. Not that. They themselves had in them both. So that's a real everlasting union. But coming back over here, and I want to say one more point, back to Nigla, that how many times is Beis Hillel, Machmer, and Beis Shammai lenient? Many more than 6 times. Just understand that Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi had his unique version of what Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel says. We already know this from just a few daf ago. The fact that we had a Mishnah on Daf Tes, Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and there was a Havamina that Rabbi Yossi has some other version, Al Pi Svara. Then the Gemara found out, but I said, no, Rabbi Yossi happens to have the same version. So you see that Rabbi Yossi's tradition, at times, he had a different mesoira of what Beis Shammai says, what Beis Hillel says. There are 6 times, and the following 6, we're only going to learn two from the 6, because the second one is our topic. But to get to the second, the Gemara quotes the first. You can argue just quote the second. I don't know the reason for that. But in these 6 that the Mishnah writes in Oidiyos, only Rabbi Yossi has the version of their argument in the way. You get it, that Beis Shammai is the lenient and Beis Hillel is the chomer, is the stringent. Case number 1, again, there's
Rabbi Yossi that there were actually only 6 times that.
No, there were many, many more, but on the other times he agrees with everyone else's tradition. In the 6, the 2 that we're going to quote, only according to his tradition do they say what they say, in a way where Beis Shammai is machmer and Beis Shammai is mekel and Beis Hillel is machmer. Number 1 is ha'oif oila ala shulchan im hagavina ve'einoi nechol k'divrei Beis Shammai. Let's take a quick intro. According to the Torah, even though the words are loy sevashel gedi b'chalev imoi, but we know that what did God tell Moshe Rabbeinu, that one may not cook meat and milk, meat from a kosher species, not any meat, not chazer with milk, but an animal, not that it was geshachten. The species that's kosher with milk from a species that's kosher cannot be mixed together, cannot be cooked together. And it cannot be consumed if it was cooked together, and you can't even have benefit if it was cooked together. But midda oiraisa, we go according to those who hold that fowl, bird, chicken, midda oiraisa, could be cooked and eaten together with milk. Midrabanan, it cannot be eaten together with milk. Remember that. That's rule number 1. Rule number two, for many people here I know learn smicha. In Yoredeya, I think it's peches. I think it's Simon Peches, Pezayin Peches. We have a rule that one is not allowed to put on the table meat and milk. Just for clarity, in the times of Chazal, as we know, the tables were very small. Every person had their own mini table. And it was very common that when you put two foods on the same little table, the foods themselves would touch one the other. So one was not allowed to put meat and milk on the same table. It happens to be that even though our tables are bigger, that's the way Torah works, the rule remains. We're not talking about putting it on the table when you are when you're not going to be eating it, halachically. But when you are eating at the same table, you can't have meat and milk on the same table, only if, for example, under the meat, they put a meat, a meat, what's it called? Not a plate, the mat, or a tablecloth, or a heker. But stam, to have on the same table meat and milk, is something that's asur. Whoever learns smicha, and that's a very important. There's a shach in the beginning of that siman. He wants to know whether that is only for basar b'chalav, that are both mutter. What about mutter and asur? What happens if I'm traveling, I'm in the airport, and I'm going to a table, and someone next to me is putting his tray for food? It's not such a real question, because I'm also going to have some sort of plate, and I don't want to touch the table. But anyways, meat and milk cannot be put on the table. Question is, can fowl and milk be put on the table? Now, you would think that, why? Because why could you not put it on the table? It's a gezerah. It might touch each other. It might mingle. Don't forget that fowl and milk is only an isur midrabanan. It's a gezerah midrabanan, a placemat. Thank you, Vlad. And there is a general rule that we don't make a gezerah ligzerah. That would be we're not mixing the chicken with the milk. If you put it on the table together, they might mix. Shkoyach. And even if they mix, the whole isur is only midrabanan. So that's why Beis Shammai holds that Gevina doesn't only mean cheese; he means milchiks. Even though the eino nechol can't eat it, but since the eino nechol is midrabanan, he holds that you're not going to make another gezerah, which is not putting it on the same table. He's lenient. We pass on like Beis Hillel that loy oilam the loy nechol. Not only you can't put it on the table and you can't eat it together. If I remember correctly, when we had this sugya in Chulin, Rashi says, gzeira ligzeira. He writes, chad gzeira. In other words, Rashi writes that when you put these two foods on those tables, you're going to eat them together. It's not such a far-fetched gzeira. It's when they made the gzeira, you can't mix fowl and milk. Together with that is, don't put it in the same package. Don't put it on the same table. However else they'll understand why we would be stringent. Anyways, this is really l'chu'ura, not negeya to our topic, but we're building up to the second of the six. We're not going to go further than the second. Now here again, the opening of the Mishnah and the Duyos speaks about what we will call daf tes. Says the Mishnah there, Toirimin zeisim al shemen, va'anovim al yayin. We had this girsa yesterday when we quoted the Baraisa, Kedivrei Rav Meir, very lenient, not the way we learned the Mishnah and Daf Tes. Here, their version is that Beis Shammai is so lenient that he holds that you can lechatchila separate truma from olives for oil. That means mi davar shaloi nigmar amalachtoi al davar that yes nigmar amalachtoi. Same is. I feel bad for Gabriel because we keep on harping on the oil. We're forgetting about the wine. Va'anovim al yayin. He's that lenient. Kedivrei Beis Shammai. Now, okay, and Beis Hillel is the machmer. And what does Beis Hillel say? Just to know the words. Ubeis Hillel oimrim ein toirmin. You can't do it. And as a rule, chevra, when he says you cannot do it, you know what that implies? Not that if you did it, it's not valid. Shouldn't do it. Ein Torah means lechatchila you can't do it, which would mean that if you did it b'di'evet, it is valid. Okay, now let's go to the same thing we said yesterday. This was all in the Bavli. There would be many more words in the Gemara. We got a problem. The problem is like this: that Rabbi Yosi on Daf Yud Aleph, go back if you forgot, the Gemara quotes a Braisa, B'Shem Rabbi Yosi, that Rabbi Yosi had exactly the nusach that we had on Daf Tesamid Beis, which would be that Lebeis Hillel, according to Rabbi Yosi, not only Ein Toidemin, not only you can't do it, if you did it, it's not valid. And not only if you did it, it's not valid, the olives for the oil, the olives for the olives themselves also won't be valid because you did it all together, the way we had the Mishnah on Daf Tes. Now that's a contradiction. That can be. And as we learned at the end of yesterday's shir, all of these things are amazing. They're just implied in the Gemara. Therefore, we must say that's at least this is spoken out. Amar Rabbi Manam, that when you learn the shita of Beis Hillel, even though when he quotes Kedivrei Beis Shammai, he's speaking about olives for oil, but when we speak about Beis Hillel, we're not speaking about olives for oil. That cannot be. Because olives for oil, Beis Hillel will agree to Beis Shammai, L'chumra, that it's not valid. Not only Ein Toidemin, which implies don't do it, but if you did it, it's done. No Truma. What does Beis Hillel say Ein Toidemin on the case of Daf Yud Beis? That Leis Kan Zeisem Al Shemen. That's not the case that Rabbi Yosi is talking about. The case really must be El Shemen Al Zeisim. Must be. And why is that? Because the Rabbi Yosi Omer Ein Truma say Truma. Since we have a Braisa on Daf Yud Aleph in which Rabbi Yosi says that Beis Hillel says that when you remove Truma from Zeisim on Shemen, it's not Truma at all, not Ein Toidemin. But more than that, Ein Truma say Truma. So the case of the Mishnah in the Duyos must be oil for olives. And we're not done yet. Now let's go further. What does our Mishnah write if you separate oil for olives? Our Mishnah writes a very big thing. Don't do it. If you did it, Truma say Truma, but v'yachzor v'yitroim. Rabbi Yosi does not say that. Rabbi Yosi doesn't say v'yachzor v'yitroim. Even though we qualified that when does our Mishnah say you have to remove Truma again, as we'll see now in the Gemara, that when do you have to remove Truma again? Only if you lost the first. We're going to come to that in a moment. Rabbi Yosi doesn't say any of that. Rabbi Yosi's version of Beis Hillel, which is the halacha, that when you remove oil, when you remove Truma from oil for olives, don't do it. And if you did it, it's good. And if you lose it, you don't have to do it again. All of that is just reaffirming that our whole Mishnah on Daf Yud Beis, that's predicated on what we call Geder Mechatos, which is a very difficult thing to understand. Geder Mechatos, they're afraid that the Mechatos will become a futile because this Truma got lost. It's difficult, but that's what we're saying. Oh, Baruch Hashem, we have the new generation over here with us. Where's Mordechai? That's it. So clearly, back to all that, we wanted to make a Kal V'chomer yesterday. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. Logically, the Kal V'chomer stands, but de facto, like we have in the third line on Daf Yud Daled, the fact is that Rabbi Yosi does subscribe to Gezel HaShevet. Rabbi Yosi agrees with the Mishnah on Daf Tes. Rabbi Yosi holds olives for oil. You gave to the kohen olives, you're making him schwitz, you're making it into oil, or you might got the wrong ratio. The Chachamim says what you did is nothing. But there's no Geder Mechatos. You shouldn't have separated oil for the olives. You shouldn't have done that. But if you did it, say that you did it. Atkan, Gavaldik. And now we're going to go to our Mishnah on Daf Yud Beis, oil for olives, that the Mishnah writes, even though Truma, v'yachzer v'yitroim, but you got to separate it again. And what we're learning explicitly in the Gemara is something that we already spoken yesterday, plus we'll add a big detail today. But first, let's chazer. Number one, says the Gemara, that even though our Mishnah says yachzer v'yitroim, it's not pashut, not you have to do it again, right? If this is easy, we're reviewing. It's only when b'she'ein harushoyne kayemes. No, since the reason of a yachzer v'yitroim is because of geder mechatos. Geder mechatos does not exist if you did not lose it. Geder mechatos means we want that if a kohen is tummy and he has truma to eat, if he's tummy from corpse tuma, not every tuma needs the mechatos, he should have to use the mechatos. So what does it have to do with our topic? It means that if this truma was lost, We want for the kohen to get a new truma, for him now to have to schwitz with the mechatas. It should be worth it for him to purify himself. In other words, the whole din of a yachsav yitrim is only v'she'ein harashoyna kayemes. Daf Yudalid Amid Beis. Avalamois harashoyna kayemes. Now, this detail we did not learn yesterday. What happens if you have the oil? So what did we say yesterday? Then nothing needs to be done. Says the Gemara, no. Not nothing needs to be done. Something has to be done. And that's another layer that we did not learn. What has to be done? So let's use the words kriya shem was something that we never spoke out yet in this Masech, even though we spoke so much about it. Kriya shem doesn't mean by the bris you're giving the boy a name, or by the Torah you're giving a girl a name. Kriya shem means that when you separate truma, even though in order for you to give it to the kohen, you physically have to separate it. You have to remove it. But actually, the designation of the truma does not demand for you to make a physical hafrasha. What it does demand is for you to verbally say, now whether you have to verbalize it, whether you only have to think it, we're not going to go into that right now. But kriya shem means that you have to declare or have in mind that this is truma. So let me just go back to the case of the Mishnah. So I have oil and I have olives. And let me go with the right ratio for you, Aviv. I have 50 liters of oil, and I have so much olives that when those olives will become oil, that will be another 50 liters of oil. That means that in potential, I have 100 liters of oil. The case of the Mishnah is that this person took from the 50, he took 2 liters, not 1 liter, 2 liters for the oil and for the olives, and he said, this is truma. The Mishnah says that, the way the Gemara is explaining it, that if you did not lose these 2 liters, even though you made the olives into oil, you don't have to do anything. Not exactly. When the olives are made into oil, you go over to one of these 2 liters and you verbally say that your truma for these 50 liters.
Hey, Rabbi.
You got it. It's Gavaldik, yes.
If he already gave it to the kohen, that would be considered losing it, according to what our discussion?
Okay, so let's take a step back. Really, it goes on both. Who exactly has to be the one who lost it for us to invoke, for us to bring to fore the Yachzer V'Yitrim? Is it the Balabas or is it the Kohen? I would argue it's the Kohen, even if the Kohen loses it.
And when we see losing it, if the kohen consumed it already, he had
No. If the Kohen consumed it, that's not called losing it. It means he lost it.
Okay, but it's not here right now.
I think it means, in other words, if it's Geder Mechatas, it's about the Kohen's needing to use the Mechatas. It's about the Kohen's not eating it because the Kohen lost it. No, the Kohen loses it and the Balabas has to do it again. Well, the Balabas shouldn't have done it. And here we're saying that even if he didn't lose it, and therefore he doesn't have to make a new separation, but he has to be quite a shame. Another detail. Now, this is the detail that we learned in the Maraf folder. Let's just speak it out clearly. Again, you did not. You lost it. You lost it. Let's go with the Gabe. I think it makes sense. Even for sure, if the Balabas lost it, even if the Kohen lost it. So now, midrabanan v'yachzer v'yitraim. So what does it mean, v'yachzer v'yitraim? Think about what's happening. I have oil. The 50 liters of oil came from olives that biblically are already mesukin from truma. Biblically, even forget about losing, even though you shouldn't have done it, but you did it. Okay. And now you're going ahead, and since you lost the first, you're taking 1 liter from these 50 that came from olives that are already mesukin, and you're saying this is truma. And now it sounds like, okay, let the kohen go ahead and eat it. No, he can't go ahead and eat it. Why can he not go ahead and eat it? Because let's think. Midoi raisa. These 50 liters, none of them are truma. When you have truma, the advantage for the kohen vis-a-vis truma is the kohen gets the truma. The kohen does not have to remove a side of Trumas Meiser. The kohen does not have to remove Meiser Rishon from the Truma. I take back what I said. Forget about Trumas Meiser. The Kohen doesn't remove anything from the Truma. He doesn't remove Meiser Rishon. He doesn't remove anything. He doesn't remove Meiser Sheni. He doesn't remove Meiser Ani. In other words, the Truma itself is good to be consumed by the Kohen. Amazing. Even though the Tevel, which is fixed from Truma, is not fixed from Meiser Rishon. It's not fixed from Meiser Sheni. So now that you're saying midrabanan, you gotta take 1 liter from the 50 liters and declare it again as truma. The chachamim can only be machmer, but they cannot be mekel, which means that when the kohen gets it, the kohen cannot consume it because mida oiraisa. This is something that needs to have meiser rishon removed from it. This is something that needs to have meiser sheni removed from it. If the owner wouldn't have lost the liter, then what would these 50 liters be that came from the oil? It would be a product that's misukan from truma, but it's tevel vis-a-vis meiser rishon, meiser sheni. It needs to have stuff removed from it. So even though we're saying now, to the benefit of the kohen is getting another liter, but the kohen cannot eat it. How can he eat it? Biblically, it has to be tithed from meiser rishon. That's gavaldik. So Tani, we learn shniya lo yisiyachad at sheyoytzi aleh trumas u'maisres. And by the way, just to make it clear, the word truma doesn't mean truma. Truma means that from it you have to have meiser rishon. From the meiser rishon you have to remove trumas meiser. That means that all of what happens after truma gedola, whether it's done by the owner, whether it's done by the Levi, the Trumas Meiser normally is done by the Levi, even though we learned a few daf ago, at least in the Yerushalmi here, B'di'evet, the owner can take away the Trumas Meiser. That's great. You have to remove it. That's great. Now hold on, I want to add one more detail. I'm saying that Yotzi Oleho means that something has to be removed for it, not from it. You don't, the kohen will not remove from it meiser rishon. I'll tell you why not. I think the words makam acher we learned yesterday in the Marafulta, even though the Gemara doesn't say the words makam acher. We learned it yesterday. I'm going to find it in a second. And it has to be makam acher. And I'll tell you why it has to be makam acher. Because midrabanan, this liter is truma. How can I remove from it 10%? How can I remove from it? 10% and give it to the Levi. The Levi won't be able to eat it. Midoiraisa, you have to remove meiser rishon. I get it. But midrabanan, it's truma. So the only way to do it properly is for the kohen to take other produce that is misukan from truma biblically, but still needs to be meisered, and separate from that for this. Minachiyuv ala chiyuv. Gavaldik.
1 second. It has to be specifically produce that has not been misukaned at all. Like, meaning, why can't you just have fully regular chulin that's fully done? You can't.
Doesn't work that way. That's the whole thing. We keep on learning that, because once you have bona fide chulin, you cannot be toidem min aptur ala chiyuv. There's a catch to all of this. There's a seder. Once something is completely chulin, I can't say, since this is completely chulin, and that is chayiv, I'll remove more from this. Doesn't work that way, because I'm removing min aptur ala chiyuv. They both have to be chayiv.
But it doesn't have to be min amukaf.
One second. Yes. Midrabanan, yeah.
So the client has gives myself from something else.
In other words, since midoiraisa, 10% of this bottle belongs to the Levi, he's not going to remove it from it because midrabanan it's truma, but he's going to take other produce that's on the same level of chiyuv as this, which is, what is this biblically? It's produce that's misukan from truma gedola, but all of the other trumais and meiseres have to be removed from it. Meiser rishon, trumas meiser, and meiser sheni or meiser ani. Yeah.
Well, he got a bottle of olive oil. He's going to get meiser
from another bottle of olive oil that has no truma in it, but still needs meiser removed from it. And when we remove meiser from that, the cheshbon of 10% is from that and from this. And like Rabbi Mendel is saying, and you don't need min amukov now.
And then you gotta get out some Trumas Meiser also.
You went to the supermarket.
So from the supermarket, you can't do that because the supermarket, that's what Danny was saying. The supermarket, you buy produce that's completely tithed. Okay, this is a good conversation. Once we got this, we are on the right track. This is very important, these steps. The simple rule, when something is tevel, and we use the words mesukan, it's not black and white. When you separate truma, it's mesukan from truma, but it's tevel from ma'aser rishon. You remove ma'aser rishon, it's mesukan from ma'aser rishon, it's tevel or ma'aser sheni. Very good. And only something that's chayiv is valid to have from it tithings removed. Doesn't have to be only from it and for something else, but they have to be on the same level of chiyuv. Okay, we did it.
What if we did all that
No.
and then it got lost afterwards?
No, he wouldn't have done any of that. If he didn't lose it yet, then he doesn't have to remove anything. He already removed two liters, we said, from the 50. Why? Because he foresaw that the olives will make another 50. That's post facto, it's good as long as he didn't lose it.
Did the other, give nice reason, nice shade?
It's not b'diavad. Yeah, so we learned, okay, you're going, yes. Now, the Gemara wants to know what happens if the truma was not lost. The 2 liters that you removed is here, be'en. And even though the Gemara just said before, but that was a statement made by an Amoida. The Gemara now wants to know whether anyone found the Tana in the Mishnah. Everyone knew the Mishnayos, and whether anyone had a Braisa or a Tosefta in which there was the same thing that we learned above, and we did. Min man de Tani, we found the Braisa that Chazer v'asa zeisim shemen. I removed from the oil 2 liters for the olives. Later, when the olives were made into oil, since I did not lose the original Truma designation, you don't have to do it again. But, quite a shame, you have to repeat on that 1 liter, you are Truma for that oil. Clearly. So, Hada Amra, you see already from a Tana, okay. Now, moving on. One case in the Mishnah is, after the Mishnah already made it clear, olives for oil for olives. We're moving on, guys. Get happy. What are we learning about now? So the Mishnah, I'm going out of the order. When the Mishnah writes that you could lechatchila separate truma from oil on olives that are meant to be consumed as is, that we get. Because we consider oil and olives to be the same thing, as long as both of them are in their completed state. Removing a truma from wine for grapes that are meant to be consumed, that fits. That's good. But the Mishnah gave an in-between case. And now we're quoting the words in the Mishnah. Toirim and shemen, you could, that's lechatchila, remove the truma from oil, not only for the oil, but also al zeisim hanichbashim, for preserved olives. Now, when you read the words, just to know, there's 3 olives. Olives that are meant to be crushed for olive oil. Before them being crushed, Iran, it's not completed. It's like a raw material. Then you have olives that are meant to be eaten the way they are. That's completed. And then you have olives, you're not going to change them, meaning you're not going to crush them, but you plan to preserve them in soil, salt, and vinegar. When the Mishnah uses the words al zeisim hanichbashim, I'm just saying from the words of the Mishnah, it sounds like your olives are already preserved. And that's why they're called a finished product, right? Tarmashaman on zeisim that are nichbashim. So that's not problematic. But even though we're going to tweak the meaning in a moment, it doesn't only have to mean what I said, but at least the pshat fits. You're taking oil for olives that are preserved. Olives that are preserved are a finished product. But then the Mishnah writes, you are allowed lechatchila, to remove truma from wine, v'yayin, on grapes that are going to become raisins. La'asoisan simukim, which means that the grapes right now are not yet raisins. Now that's a problem, because lechuura, if your intent for these grapes is for them to become raisins, when do you have a completed product? when they're raisins. Right now, they're not a completed product. The Mishnah says, and our Mishnah, the three rules, the final rule, not the final rule. When the Mishnah says that don't remove truma mi davar shenigmara malachtoi al davar sheloi nigmar malachtoi, you don't do that lechatchila. So that's a contradiction. How can the Mishnah write? And again, we're focusing on the kasha on the second statement. We'll see in a moment, I'm just giving you a heads up, that the Mishnah also will allow for you to remove truma from oil on olives that are going to be preserved. That's also going to be okay, but the Mishnah doesn't write that explicitly. So here, one might just keep the law to the words. Since the olives are already preserved, it's a completed product. But then the Mishnah says, "V'yayin al anovim la'asoyson simukam." You can remove truma from wine for grapes that you plan to make into raisins. I got a problem. Take the Gemara, Tanin and the Basra. Right away, the Mishnah writes in our Mishnah that ain't toimen mi davar shenigmer malachtoi al davar sheloi nigmer malachtoi. And now here the kasha is lisha avar. Even though if you did it, the truma is valid that I accept, but that's only l'sha'avar, meaning b'di'evet. Halachatchila loy. Problem is that the words of the Mishnah of toirmin yayin al anovim lasoisem tzimukim is mashma that even l'chatchila, why raisins is not a completed product. So the Gemara wants to suggest itemar shanyohi. If you're going to argue that you're doing it midavar shenigmara malachtoi, let's say that raisins are already grapes that are going to become raisins are already considered completed. If you're going to say, okay, it's not raisins, but you're not crushing it into wine, you're not changing it. It's going to become raisins. No. Why not? Because we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah Mesechtes Maises. Hotaninon, the Mishnah is speaking about three items. One is called pered, afered. Here the pered means dried pomegranate seeds. Go figure. Simukin is what we're talking about, the raisins. And charuvim. Now, the obligation of tithing is only when the item is in its completed form. The Mishnah goes through many items by telling us when does it reach its completed form. So says the Mishnah, Mishiyamed arema, when you heap them into a pile. So this is a bomb question. So not only are the grapes prior to being raisins not considered completed, even when they become raisins, you still have to put them into a pile. Clearly, before you put them into a pile, they're not considered the davar shenigmara malachtoi. Our Mishnah writes, lechatchila, you cannot separate truma mi davar shenigmara al davar sheloi nigmara. You got a blatant contradiction.
All right, can't you leave it in the same pile and it just turns into raisins eventually?
Kavan is saying maybe our Mishnah is speaking about a case where it's already in a pile. We have over here Gabriel. Is that the way they make raisins? Do you put them in a pile first? I think the way I remember is that they used to dry out fruits by putting them up on the
Rooftop, yeah.
And I would assume that they want the maximum exposure of sun to the maximum part of the product. If you put them into a pile, then the grapes in the middle of the pile are getting no vitamin D.
But eventually
they're not getting any exposure to the heat. They're not losing their moisture.
Over time they will.
Over time they will, but l'chu'ura, first you made them into raisins. I mean, that's the meaning of the Mishnah in Maasros, that just because you have dried seeds, just because you have tzemukim, just because you have charuvim, you're not chayv to tie them, because that's the whole word, Mishi Yamad Arema. Answers the Gemara, Chavre Daf Tezvav, Rabbi Yosi ben Yosi, either he was a Sfardi, right? Or his father unfortunately passed away prior to his birth. Or prior to his bris. It doesn't have to be prior to the birth. I would say better. Or he was buried prior to the bris. That I remember. That's the story of the Tzemach Tzedek. Remember that story? That by the bris, I think the Rebbe Marash was the only Rebbe, that the Rebbe that Tzemach Tzedek made a bris for his son as a Rebbe. I think in the whole Chabad history, he was the only one. It was all the other Rebbeim that had children, aside of our Rebbe.
So the Chaver Kadisha was lazy, right?
Very good, very good. But what happened over there is that they had children before them becoming a Rebbe. Imagine the Rebbe was already a Rebbe, and he had a son. So you can just imagine how many tens of thousands of Hasidim came to participate in the bris. And the bris he wasn't allowing the bris to start. And they asked him, when will the bris be? He said, today. Heint. I remember just being that in the last sukkahs that the Rebbe was begashmius over here, those who had the merit, the Rebbe always allowed the Hasidim to bench lulav on his lulav and esrog. So Rabbi Meir Harlik of blessed memory, he had the schus of being in charge of that. So you got in line to get tickets. Then you got in line with the tickets. It was a whole avodah. And then Rabbi Harlik would give you the Rebbe's dalad minim. You would make a bracha. And then they would take it back for the Rebbe when they came up to Halal. And then whatever. So there was a whole avodah of making that bracha. The last sukkahs, the Rebbe himself stood there. And davening did not begin. And at some point, Rabbi Groner asked the Rebbe, when are we davening? So the Rebbe said, today. Anyways, the Rebbe, the Samach Tzedek, had gesagt, Heint. And the bris happened very late. First of all, they named him Shmuel. In the Lubavitcher history, there isn't a Shmuel. And one of his children asked him, Nach Shmuel Hanavi? So it turned out to be that in Polotsk, there was a tzaddik nister who passed away, and he wanted to name, the Rebbe wanted to name his son after that tzaddik nister. Happened to be that in Polotsk, there was a wealthy man that passed away. So who did the Chevra Kadisha bury first? The wealthy man, and then he took a lunch break or something. So he muttered that the Chevra Kadisha in Polotsk, they're lazy. But coming back over here, so this is Rabbi Yossi ben Yossi. Coming back to our world over here. So Rabbi Yossi ben Yossi b'shem Yitzchak ben Elazar answers, this is Gavaldik, that ein lecha aser litrei midavar shenigmar malachlei al davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi. What is the source? This is important. Let's go back to the first thing. Why is it that you cannot, now, you want to separate truma midavar shenigmar malachlei? We don't need a source for that. That only makes sense. You're separating something to give to the kohen. What did we learn Aviv a few daf ago? Let's go, Gesel, shave it. You don't want to separate something and give it to the kohen and make the kohen work harder. That way you understand, that's a logic. So you have to separate truma midavar shenigmar malachlei. But why can you not separate it al davar shaloi? What's the source of that? Look inside the top marafulda. So he's quoting a pasuk in Parshas Koirach, and the trader writes, "The nechshav lochem trumaschem." This is a pasuk that Hashem is speaking to the Levi, who's separating from his meiser rishon, right? Meiser min ha-meiser. The pshat is God will consider it for you, for the Levi, when you make your separation, as if you separated truma kidogon min ha-goyden, as if you separated grain from the threshing floor, uchemeleya min ha-yekev. Just to know, the word Yaakov means a vat, the literal. And the Malaya here means ripeness, and as if you separated ripeness from a vat. So what do we learn from over here? That since we juxtapose the vat and the threshing floor, there are different stages of loy nigmar malachtoi. How far does a product have to be from its completion for us to apply the rule that lechatchila you cannot be toidem mi davar shenigmar malachtoi al davar shenigmar malachtoi? It has to be like the grain from the from the threshing floor. That many things have to happen from the chef, from the shiboilis, where you have to remove the klipa, and then you have to winnow, then you have to make a pile, then you have to smooth the pile. Many things have to happen to go from the olives into the vat. Many steps, as we'll learn later, all of the steps that they did to make it into oil. Since raisins, that will be the nakuda, is something that happens by itself. Yeah, what we do is preparatory stages. We put it out to the sun to dry. So even though the Mishnah stands in Mesachtes Maasros, when am I chayev to be toidem? When it's a gemar melacha. What's the gemar melacha by raisins? Not grapes, not even raisins. You have to have the pile. But the law that ain't toidem lachatchila mi davar shenigmara al davar shaloi nigmara, since the source is from either dagan min hagoyden or malaya min hayekev. So if you're turning it into the vat, when you're bringing something into a vat, whether it's oil or wine, then we say, I cannot separate oil for the grapes because they're going into the vat. oil, you verstehst, olives or grapes, whichever wine or oil. But if it's not going into the vat, then that's not sourced in the pasuk. And the chanami, you're not chayiv. You're not chayiv. But it's not asur, beautiful. The isur of saying that lachatchila ain't tournament mi davar shenigmara al davar shaloi nigmara is not shaykh in our case. Clear.
So grapes that are not yet made into raisins, but will be made into raisins, it would be effective.
Is
It would be fine.
close enough to gemar malacha, even though Danny, you're not chayiv to tie them. You're not chayiv. The chiyuv kicks in a schal when you have a gemar malacha, but the isur of lechatchila ein tournament is not shaykh to it. And now one thing becomes clear, that even though when the Mishnah spoke about oil for olives that will become preserved, the Mishnah worded it that the olives are already preserved. Perhaps it comes out that I am allowed lechatchila to separate truma from oil for olives even before they were preserved. Because if olives are only getting preserved, they are not going into the vat. They're not going into the yekev. And therefore, the source of this din is not relevant to this case.